Hello, everyone. Happy World Press Freedom Day. Welcome to Good as News, a podcast about journalism and the challenges it faces in the age of AI. Another way you can look at this podcast is it's a love letter to journalism, co-written by people who practice it, who are trying to keep it alive, and who want to see it blossom and thrive. I'm Ranada, head of community at Rappler, a news outlet in the Philippines, and your host for today's episode. I'm joined by three top editors from Southeast Asian newsrooms. We have Wahyu Dhyatmika of Tempo Digital from Indonesia, Tham of Malaysiakini from Malaysia, and Glenda Gloria from Rappler. This is very rare in Southeast Asia for different newsrooms to have a joint podcast about journalism. And though you see four people on your screen or will hear four voices, we're actually joined by several other journalists from different Southeast Asian newsrooms. We're on a virtual call with all of them now, and we'll hear from them later on during the discussion. We have in the call Ms. Zima, a multimedia news outlet from Myanmar, and Daily Guardian, a newsroom based in Iloilo in the Philippines, and many more joining later on. So, welcome, Wahyu, Tham, and Glenda. Could you say a brief hello and tell everyone what you do for your newsroom?
Hi, Pia. Good to be here. Thank you for having me, and thank you for hosting the podcast for this very important occasion of World Press Freedom Day. My name is Wahyu Dhyatmika. I've been with Tempo since more than 2 decades ago. I am the CEO for Tempo Digital, but my last post on the newsroom is as the chief editor on the magazine until 2021.
Nice to have you with us, Wahyu. Let's hear from Tham next.
Hi, my name is Tham. I'm the head of operations of Malaysiakini. I've been with Malaysiakini for 13 years. What do I do now? I take care of revenue growth. I take care of readers' engagement, audience growth as well. Before I was in this position, I was the head of content of Kini TV, which is the video arm of Malaysiakini. And before I take over a managerial position full time, I was indeed a journalist for more than 20 years.
And Glenda?
Hello, everyone. Happy World Press Freedom Day. I'm Glenda Gloria. I'm the co-founder and executive editor of Rappler. I have been a journalist for a lifetime. And I help run the newsroom with Pia and other editors, and very looking forward to this conversation with you.
Okay, thanks everyone for all those intros. I'd like to start our conversation with our joint statement for World Press Freedom Day, which all the newsrooms present signed. So the statement is centered on the hidden crisis facing journalism today, which is the topic of our episode. The reason why our newsrooms are joining forces today and in the weeks and months to come is because of this existential crisis facing journalism. And to many of our listeners who aren't journalists, you might be surprised to hear about this crisis. Maybe because you still see news in your feeds, you still watch news on TV, there's still a lot of news and journalism being produced. But in 2025, the World Press Freedom Index, for the first time in its existence, has categorized the global state of press freedom as difficult. The main factor that dragged it to this lowest point, economic pressure. In a third of all countries, media outlets are shutting down due to financial hardship. And according to Reporters Without Borders, one of the countries that stand out due to mass closures of newsrooms is from Southeast Asia, Myanmar. So it seems weird for something so ingrained in our lives or in our routines to be in danger, yet it is. And that's what we want to talk to people about on World Press Freedom Day, that news organizations are really struggling. But there's a silver lining. There is something we can do about it. So let's dive right in. First, I want to cover the basics. What are we talking about when we say news organizations or newsrooms? And how are they different from news creators or influencers who deliver news content? And I'm sure a lot of our listeners have seen these, diba, in our feeds. I'd like to ask Glenda to define that for us. So Glenda, what is a newsroom? Can you paint a rough picture of how a newsroom brings news to communities or audiences?
Well, maybe I'll start with really a literal painting of a newsroom. I'm here seated in a newsroom. I see laptops. This live stream, this podcast would not be possible without a camera, without an entire team working behind me. I see a group of reporters there in a huddle with their editors, brainstorming about a certain project. But beyond the physical setting of a newsroom is really, we have journalists going out in the field, talking to people, immersing in their experiences. And then once those stories get published, the reaction from the public can range from either inspiration to anger to joy. And that hopefully will move them into really making critical action, whether that's just critical thinking or really getting mobilized to move or to decide on certain matters that they read about in the news.
Thank you for that. So, of course, it's something we really want to show people how different, right? We experience news, and perhaps just to concretize this a little bit more, because perhaps even if journalism plays a critical role in our lives, it's probably not felt or not noticed by a lot of people. So, just to make this more concrete, could each of you name one big change in your country that can be directly attributed to a work of journalism? Anyone can start.
I can start first. I can start first. I think in the case of Malaysia, definitely it is the 1MDB case, where international newsroom as well as local newsroom in Malaysia really took a lot of effort to report about it. I think we definitely spent more than 5 years, digging, getting more information behind it. And when local newsroom face pressure, we work together with foreign newsroom, or sometimes we just don't work together. We happen to get some resources based on their investigation. So that took place for more than 5 years. And eventually in 2018, we finally have a change in government in 60 years because the people were just so angry about the case. But all this information and truth behind the incident or behind this money being stolen wouldn't be made known to the world if not because of journalism. That is the case of Malaysia.
Yeah. So it was a corruption story. How about you, Wahyu, for the case of Indonesia?
Yeah, I think I can think many many changes happen triggered by the news story. I think the last one when Indonesia was hit by natural disasters, the big flood in Sumatra a few months ago. I think more than 1,000 people were killed during the disasters, and many news reports pointed out the devastating impact of the flood and how the flood was also triggered by illegal logging, deforestation, and immediately after that stories broke out, the government freeze licensing and permit for companies that work around the epicenter of the flood and deforestation. But I would like to also think that many of the changes doesn't happen immediately. News stories help shape the way we think about our environment, the way we see things, the public opinion, our perception of things. And sometimes it can be about government accountability, it can be about public service, it can be about social norms, social values. So I think that's more important than the immediate effect sometimes.
You're right. And I think disaster is definitely one of those instances or coverages when journalism is essentialized for a lot of people. Glenda, how about in the Philippines?
We have a former president in The Hague, Pia, Rodrigo Duterte. If not for the dogged work of investigative journalists in the Philippines, the massive killings that happened in the 6 years of his term would not have been known to the public, to the ICC. If you look at the charge sheet of the International Criminal Court against Duterte, it is filled with footnotes, 100 of them from Rappler stories and other stories from the other networks and Filipino media. It is a moment of pride for Filipino journalists who withstood harassment, who spent in the field every night monitoring and writing about the killings, seeing all the blood spilled and all the listening to mothers crying out there because their sons had just been killed in the streets. But now you have that former president being tried in court, and that's really a momentous occasion.
So what I'm getting from all of you, and I hope something our listeners are also getting, is that journalism is very powerful, but it's not easy to make that kind of impact. Let's talk about the very real pressures and threats to newsrooms right now. Sinhao, from your work running Malaysiakini, what is the biggest existential crisis in journalism that your newsroom is feeling the brunt of? How has it already impacted your operations, your ability to bring information and news that Malaysians need?
I think the problem that Malaysiakini is facing is also the same problem that newsrooms worldwide are facing, and that is the change in user behavior. For us, a few years ago, we started seeing the traffic going down. I think it is a combination of reasons. If you add the end of COVID together with the rise of TikTok, plus Facebook stopping referring traffics, plus the introduction of AI bots, when all of it come together, it really caused a drop in traffic as well as people's demand for news. So that is why about 2 years ago or 1.5 years ago, we have to do a restructuring and let some people go. It was a very, very painful experience for us. But at the same time, I think it was also a wake-up call for many of us in the newsroom. For instance, after that incident, some colleagues actually came forward and offered themselves to do content in video format. And in not only that, but in more creators-like format. It was a surprise to us because many of them were quite camera shy before this. But I guess that change allowed people to realize that it is very important for us to understand the kind of limitation that we are facing right now. So that's number one. And the second thing is it also, that incident, which was a restructuring, also caused us to use data more. We did very in-depth audience research to try to understand how we can engage with our existing supporters better. Because in an age where previously social media companies and platforms take away that direct connection, now it is the AI bots that is taking away another chunk of direct connection with the supporters and the readers. So that is why we have spent a lot of efforts into investing in newsletter, into hosting in-person events, just to ensure that the engagement that we have with our readers and supporters are still there.
That conversation is happening in all newsrooms. I think those are very familiar conversations, very familiar problems, and also quite similar innovations that I think many newsroom managers are dealing with and having to transition their organizations through. I wanted to ask Wahyu, you have had years of experience reporting on corruption, and the similar the similar limitations on resources is really an issue. So what kind of resources does that kind of work entail, given the impact that it can make? And what is the biggest hurdle right now, you think, to solid corruption reportage?
Yeah, I think we have moved on from the previous challenge in investigative reporting, which is access to data, online data. I think the prevalence of internet, the openness and transparency, a lot of our public offices have shown make it more accessible for journalists, for newsrooms to get data, to learn and to study, to crunch the data to see if there is any misconduct or anything that improper happening behind the scenes. But now I think the change is the more bigger challenge for us is how do we make sure that this story gets through to the audience, because with the change of audience behavior that Sinhua mentioned earlier, more and more audience now tend to consume shorter content. They would like to see visual content, sound bites, and sometimes investigative stories which are long. Needs to be really careful. A lot of nuances. Sometimes things are not really straightforward. It can be dangerous and can be misleading if you change those investigative stories into smaller and shorter bits or clips. So how do you then transfer this knowledge, transfer this insight to your audience without creating more noise, without creating misperception, and without making people misunderstood the whole story? I think that's the bigger challenge now.
Speaking of noise, I'm also recalling just the turnover process for investigative stories. It can take maybe a few minutes for someone to come up with a piece of disinformation or fake news, but it could take months or even years for a reporter to produce an investigative report. And just that kind of mechanism or that kind of timeline is not compatible a lot of times with the kind of algorithms we have and people's attention. So a very real problem, a very real challenge for investigative reporting, given the intense resources it takes. And to add all of this, right, is AI. I mean, artificial intelligence, I would say, is the elephant in the room in all of our newsrooms. So this question is for Glenda. AI and how we use it is the hottest topic now in all industries. But in journalism, what do you think is the biggest threat posed by AI? Many people have heard about AI scraping, and we've all seen AI overviews on Google or used ChatGPT or Claude to get answers. But how do these directly impact news outlets?
Well, to be very, very frank, Pia, AI is stealing our audiences. It's really blocking our direct communication with them. To be very specific, search is one of the source of traffic for news sites, meaning to say readers who are listening now really just look for information using Google search. But back in the day, before AI, they would do the search on, for example, a disaster in Indonesia, what happened to this tsunami in Indonesia, and comes out Tempo. And it directly links to the website of Tempo. And the reader naturally will click the link to Tempo. Now, because of AI overviews, and not to mention the chatbots that readers already have access to, they have instant answers, and the links are buried. Of course, Google will say, "Oh, the links are there. They're masked. They're very thin. You can barely see them." And so, what happens is the readers now are made to believe that what they're seeing, the summaries they're seeing, are truthful, that it's the correct information, and they don't feel the need to go to the website which gathered the first information in the first place. So that kills the audience relationship of news sites with its communities. And what is the impact of that? It kills our business. Because of course, if very few readers go to the websites, then what company would dare to advertise on that specific website? So it's both a tool, yes. AI helps facilitates work for us, but definitely there's more disadvantage in terms of the overall core business and the nature of journalism.
Thank you for that. I also wanted to ask, maybe Wahyu and Sin, how you are also working on AI or with AI for a lot of journalistic initiatives. Could you tell a little bit more about it?
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword, as Glenda mentioned. We do feel the advantage of using or utilizing AI technology. Now we can create a chatbot or create data intelligence tools based on our extensive archive. Tempo has been around since 55 years ago, so we have collective stories since 1970s. So it gives a lot of insight and knowledge, which previously very difficult to manage, to utilize, to develop a product from. But now using AI, it's possible. It's doable in a very short time. But at the same time, we need to find a better relationship with a better engagement mechanism with this AI platform. Because this ironic when we see a flood of information, we see a lot of opportunities, we see a lot of need for public interest journalism. People needs verified information. People needs context to understand their surrounding, and that is provided by journalism. But at the same time, we face this crisis because we don't have or we don't receive enough compensation for the contribution that we made to the AI platform. They just scrap, they just utilize stories without giving proper compensation to publishers.
How about you,
For
Simo?
us-
Have you experienced this?
Yes, sure, definitely. For us, not only like many other newsroom, I guess like many other companies and industries now, we are having a love-hate relationship with AI and AI companies. For us, we try our approach to this issue is we try to augment whatever productivity we can, but we don't allow automation. Meaning that it's AI hygiene 101. We do not allow things to go up without human in the loop, especially audience fronting content. So that we also have some tools in house that help us in terms of, you can name it, basically just to increase our productivity. Our belief is ultimately AI companies need to engage with newsroom and pay for the content because their machines are getting smarter and smarter by the day because of the good quality of work that we produce. If we all die out and no one is there to produce good quality journalism, what would happen to AI bot and AI preview in that case? So ultimately, they will have to pay. Yeah.
And that is one area of collaboration that we as newsrooms in this call can work on in the coming months. So AI, right? That's one part of the tech problem, tech challenges facing journalism. You've already mentioned actually the second tech challenge that we are all experiencing, the social media platforms. So I wanted to ask Wahyu, Southeast Asia is a region where a lot of people are on social media. And for the Philippines and Indonesia, that's very, very much the reality. And they get their information from social media platforms. The majority really actually see Facebook as the internet already. So we have a population of young, tech-savvy people always on TikTok or Facebook. And a lot of newsrooms, including ours, initially used this to our advantage. But in recent years, that relationship has changed, and newsrooms are not at all certain that big tech platforms are allies of journalism. In Tempo's case, what have been the major challenges in working with these social media platforms or relying on them?
Yeah, I think we've been missing one key points in our workflow. We've been, as publishers, we've been focusing on producing the news, producing the stories, but we let other companies, third-party companies, to take care of our distribution. So we let the social platforms to make sure our stories get to the right people, and then we lose the very important relationship that we should have between us as the newsroom and our audience. So what we try to do is we try to make sure that there's always a bridge back to our own ecosystem. So even though we produce content on social media, we have to be there because that's where the audience is. But we always try to provide a bridge back to our own website, to our own newsletters, as Sinhua and Glenda mentioned. Audience engagement is key because that's when you start building value and you can measure how you can stay relevant to your audience. So I think we are also experimenting here. We are not claiming to be, to know the silver bullet to solve this issue, but I believe platforms are still important. We do need them, but we need to change the dynamic of the relationship. We need to make sure that we still own the relationship, the engagement, the audience that we serve.
Given that, right, the need for a dynamic shift, could maybe Glenda and Sinhao tell us about how they're navigating this and what ways are we able to lessen reliance on these social media platforms and own our distribution systems? Perhaps Glenda would like to take this question first.
Yeah, in Rappler, we really have had a hard pivot in the last 2 years. I would call it like a sugar-free, low-carb diet, which means to say that we're starting to move away from platforms, knowing that Facebook no longer brings the traffic. But as Wahyu has said, you need Facebook to promote your site, to promote membership as far as Rappler is concerned, and really just to do public service announcements. But on the other hand, opposite to that is really just to counter that with how do you then create certain distribution channels outside social media. And we've experimented with newsletters. That's a direct relationship with readers coming through our content coming through their inbox. We've had a lot of road shows. To us, ultimately, on-ground relationship still the key to that, trying to counter the online monopoly of these tech platforms. And third would be various other, like the app. We launched the Rappler app. That's a safe space. It is a space that is not controlled by Facebook, not controlled by tech. It is a space where algorithms does not rule the game. And it is a space where hopefully Tempo of Indonesia will be joining, and Malaysiakini. But as I speak, it is a space shared with Sunstar Cebu, Daily Guardian, and the Philippine Press.
How's it been like for Malaysiakini, Sinhao?
For Malaysiakini, I think we have more than 13 million followers on multiple social media platforms. So due to that, they still remain a group of very important assets for us, because they are the first level funnel for us. That's where we can get referral traffic. Not only that, that is also the platforms that allowed our brand to remain relevant to the massive users and audience out there. So we are treating them as a place for us to make sure that people still remember Malaysiakini. Whenever we produce videos and social media content, we make sure that our brand is there, and we make sure that our anchors and our reporters mention our name and repeatedly tell them that, look, this is a work by Malaysiakini. So that is that. But like Glenda said, it is also important for us to build our own distribution channel. So newsletter is also something that we have been doing for some years now. Other than that, also similar to Rapplers, we have been doing many community events, in-person events, especially engaging youth, especially related to stories that community are interested. So those are some of the approaches that we have been having.
I'm also going to give a shout out to Sunstar Cebu. They've just joined us, so I wasn't able to greet everyone earlier, but welcome, Sunstar Cebu. So the first part of that podcast, right, of this conversation was really about the major challenges, the issues, and we want to talk about the opportunities, right? So there's been also a lot of hope, actually. This crisis, many people are thinking, could help journalism evolve. It could also push people to contribute more directly to journalism and see journalism as a public good they'd be willing to support. Given these obstacles, Glenda, where do you see the path forward? While this is a difficult time for journalism, it's also an opportunity to innovate, to change our relationship with our audiences and communities, and as this episode attests, to collaborate. So what are some ways newsrooms are rising to that challenge?
Well, I think, as you've said, Pia, this is one proof that we're rising to the challenge, this collaborative network that we're building. I think we have, but beyond that is really embracing the fact that we're no longer competitors. Back in the day, and why you could relate to, we're almost the same age, I think, why you. We were fiercely competitive with each other in Indonesia, in the Philippines, in Malaysia. But now we've got to have each other's back, right? Because the competition out there is more than 200 million content creators. So there's that. So with that realization, there's really the collaboration now among networks, news outlets here in the Philippines, but also within Southeast Asia. And there's really an attempt to really move beyond just content sharing, because that's just surface, right? But it's really more talking about problems and solutions to them. And those solutions have to be made collectively and there's no single newsroom can do it alone. And that is why we are organizing ourselves, not just in the Philippines, but within Southeast Asia, to be able to have the strength to maybe not just to negotiate with the platforms, but really to share our resources, to train each other. Our strength could be something like maybe AI, and then Indonesia journalists can teach us, really expose us to a lot of the investigative work they've done on the environment, etc. Malaysiakini, in terms of the subscription model and what they have learned from that subscription model, etc. It's really, really coming up with solutions that we can all collectively. And third, finally, is really we can share our audiences. We have to try to really just not share each other's content, but really have a safe platform where we're all in. That's a vision. We're not yet there, but imagine a world where we all are in one newsroom and in one platform virtually with shared audiences, millions of them just reading our content.
And that is the roadmap
It's
for
a
the next
pipe
few
dream.
months. Yes. But it's exciting. I hope everyone is excited about that collaboration. But like imagine, right? Like an internet that is built for human thriving instead of just the profit of the this big tech companies that have been driving our digital realities for such a long time. So yes, that is the vision. At this point, as I mentioned earlier at the start of this episode, we're actually joined by other newsrooms who are not in like visually in the call, but they're also in the virtual call. And we've been getting some questions from our newsroom participants, and I'll be reading some of them out for all of our guests to answer here. And the first question comes from Mildred Galarpe, who is the editor-in-chief of Sunstar Cebu. Her question is, when Google started, publishers were up in arms because it was scraping our content for free. Later, however, Google introduced a model that allowed publishers to earn from search traffic. This is similar to what is happening now with AI chatbots. How can this group lobby to AI companies to create a monetization model for publishers? Or is stopping AI from scraping our content the solution?
Yeah, I think it's a bit a different case comparing Google with AI platform. I think Google, as a search engine, has an interest to engage with all sort of content creators or publishers. They need all information in the world to be indexed so that users can find it on their platforms. So they do in the early days before the business model changed, obviously into AI driven platform, has an incentive to make sure has to give incentive to publishers to make sure that that we align our formats to their algorithm. But in AI, it's a different, I think, a different case because the large language model obviously now are focusing on high resource language or language that are used by the majority of the users, mostly in the third world countries in US and Europe. mostly English. So for our own languages, there's very little interest, if not to say no interest at all, to really include our languages into the model. So that will create a problem for us, for our audience, for our people who use our local language, because we are not included in the process, in the training of this intelligence model. So that's one issue. And then the other issues is there's no legal requirement or not enough legal protection for publishers, for stories. For instance, in Indonesia, there is no copyright mechanism to protect news from being scrapped, from being utilized by AI platform. So I think that gave us a disadvantage in terms of the negotiation to make sure that we have a fair relationship with the AI platform. But I share Glenda's optimism, but there is still a way forward. There is still a future where we own our own distribution channel, and there is also a world where publishers and AI platform can sit on the table and to discuss a fairer mechanism to make sure that this AI technology benefit all of us. I still do believe in that.
Glenda and Sinha, would you also want to answer this question?
Yeah. I think I'd prefer to look at it on the governance aspect of it, Pia. And thanks for the question, Mildred. It's really not, I think newsroom should not just be too focused on the tech platforms and dealing with big tech, but really demanding policies, both on the local level, meaning governments, but also in institutionally, globally. If there's one reason that we're here at this moment in time, in a very dark period, both for tech and for journalism, is precisely the lack of governance of tech. And from experimentation to training, the lack of transparency as far as what they're doing, what they're experimenting with. They deploy the AI agents after they have trained them. And that's, we react after the fact, after we have used them, which is really should not be the case. And so I think newsrooms have to really also focus on the governance, like are the executive, is the executive branch in your governments really aware of this? And maybe we could contribute, we could play a role in educating, I'm sorry, but our lawmakers, our policymakers in really what needs to be demanded, both on the domestic level, but also globally. And I think if I could mention, Maria's role in the UN, for example, and that is why she's very focused on the global goals of governing tech, because in the end, if you're doing just individual negotiations with tech platforms, it's a game of whack-a-mole, right? One thing will not lead to really a fundamental change. But if you're approaching the problem globally, then you know that there's got to be some firmer policy making as far as the overarching rules are concerned.
I think this is an issue that definitely requires effort from multiple pillars. What Glenda said just now is quite spot on. This is also a policy issue. It is also a governance issue. We must realize that journalism is an essential service, an essential industry, much like how clean water is needed, how clean air is important, electricity is important. Accurate information dissemination is also important for us to form an informed society. It really it's so important that requires policy interference. So that's number one. Number two, I know that in the last few years, there have been organizations like newsroom that come together and think about collectively forming a sort of not alliance, but maybe creating a pact and then approaching AI companies to try to negotiate something with them. So that could be another approach. I also know that there are third-party companies out there that can represent newsroom, and they are pretty much like an agency. So they will go to all the newsroom and said, would you like to join us with an MOU? And then we can represent you to start talking to AI companies. So that's another way. But ultimately, I believe two factors are important. One is your population. Number two is your language, like Wahyu just now point out. If it is a language that is not English, but it still has a sizable population for a country like Indonesia or the Philippines, I think ultimately AI companies will have interest in engaging you, just so that, the quality of their information or of their data is also good. But I hope they come to newsroom in this country quick enough before we die. And hopefully there are some policies, some governance before that.
I think it's really crazy how AI scrapers affect our traffic too, and be even paying for them to scrape us in a way because of the servers, right? The server cost that we would have to shoulder for being scraped by AI, getting our journalism and using it for their search engine. So definitely a double whammy that journalists, newsrooms have to deal with. We have a second question from Miko Superable from Rappler. He's in charge of growth and marketing. His question is, revenue is directly hit when traffic is affected due to changing user behavior. How do you manage to transition to in-person events when the organization of these events themselves take up resources? Are in-person events really sustainable in 2026? Further, are we sure people want to be intimate and connect with newsrooms?
In the case of Malaysiakini, in-person events are very important for us in the last few years and in this year as well. How do we remain sustainable? Well, I suppose every market is different. In our market, we still have business partners as well as advertisers who are very interested in events, and they're willing to sponsor events. And we play a role to engage our audience and also to work together with our advertisers. So in the case of Malaysia, yes, the answer is it is very relevant. It is sustainable.
I think it also harks back to this need, especially among young people, right, for analog experiences almost. Like there's this nostalgia for in-person connection. And it's an interesting to see a lot of newsrooms experiment with that, like live podcast recordings with an audience or even parties where there are also like lectures on tap. Those kinds of formats, I think, are very different and refreshing for journalism to get into. And it is an interesting experiment. Would anyone else here like to answer that question from Miko?
Yeah, I think
Well, I
in
think,
person.
yeah. Go ahead, Wahyu.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Wahyu.
Yeah, I just want to say that in-person event is of course has lower margin, lower profit margin because you have to, you have to pay for the production costs. In our case, we try to collaborate a lot in producing this event. As Sinwa mentioned, we can solder the cost together with universities, with campuses, or with research institute, or community organizers, things like that, so that we kind of complement each other without have to bear all the costs ourselves.
Thank you for that. Also want to acknowledge the presence of Kiri Post. Thank you for joining to the Kiri Post, our Kiri Post friends. And better late than ever, we're actually about to wrap up this episode. But before that, we don't want to end on a sad note. So we want to end this first episode with a segment called The Good News. Sorry for the corny title, but it is something we want to end with, like a positive note, a note of empowerment, and just a little bit of hope down the line. So I invite our three guests to end this episode with a sharing of one recent initiative or story from your newsroom that gives you hope. And how can people support or be part of it? Let's start with Wahyu first.
Yeah, I think one of the recent experiment that we tried in our newsroom is to to really shift the newsroom's focus to the audience. So we've been implementing the user needs model to identify what are the values, what are the things that our users really want to see in our content. So the process of deciding editorial content that used to be very one-sided. Usually the newsroom knows it all. They decide what's news. Now we have to take into account what the readers think, what the audience indicate. We need to analyze the performance of each article, which has a lot of traction, which has a lot of conversion into subscription, what people needs to see more, what people needs to see less. I think that's really changed the mindset in the newsroom. And I think it's a good thing because this disruption make us realize that we cannot live without our audience. We have been taking them for granted.
So the human-centric approach to journalism. That's what I'm hearing. Let's hear next from Glenda.
Well, I think we launched the Rappler Communities app late last year, but I think it's a work in progress, and we're very excited about it because of the community channels. So there are channels that are really very specific to the interest of the reader. So if you're very interested in transparency and accountability in government, there's Corruption Watch. You can join that Corruption Watch channel, and that has been a really very active channel because of the flood control scandal that happened last year, which was really the biggest corruption scandal in the Philippines. And that was the channel where a lot of citizens really put all their leads, information, and all their politicians with flood control contracts. And it really was an amazing time because then it showed to us really the connection of citizen, of audience, and journalist. A lot of our stories were inspired by the tips, but more so using our technology, which is the Rappler app. So tech is not so bad, right? I mean, it really, when put to good use, it can really transform people, communities, countries, and even newsrooms for that matter. So that's what we're very hopeful about, is those channels that bring the citizens in direct communication with the journalist. And as Wahyu has said, there is no story better than a story that comes from the ground and not from the desks of editors who, back in the day, we used to say, we know it all. We set the editorial agenda. That's not the game now. The editorial agenda is shared with the communities because it is the communities that ought to be directly impacted by the stories, right?
For
And
me,
last but
I
not
think
the least,
Yeah.
See.
So for me, my newsroom, definitely there is an increasing consensus that if journalism previously, it's more about accessibility and breadth of the topics that we cover, meaning that you must go to this many press conferences in a day because that's how you stay competitive in the market. People are churning out 3 stories per hour, going to 1 press conference. I think now we have almost a consensus that it's very important for us to start focusing more in terms of doing long form, in terms of doing stories with depth, because I wouldn't be surprised if one day Meta or Grok or Google will start, summarizing their user-generated content on their social media and then producing news clips or news summaries out of that. For instance, if there is a flood somewhere, they might not need to rely on newsroom in covering that. Just local people, everybody taking footage and reporting their real-time situation. Maybe that is even good enough for social media and AI to summarize and produce some sort of news summary to people. What would make us stand out from the rest of the AI company is definitely the integrity of information that we produce, the kind of depth that we can go into. For instance, that would really be an encouragement and motivation for us to work with other newsroom, maybe newsroom in the Philippines, Indonesia, to do stories that AI and ordinary people can't do. We can also think about working together with think tanks, research houses, subject matters experts to really dig deep and provide different experience to our users, like interactive or multimedia together. So those are opportunities that we have. And I think we should stay positive in that way.
A lot of hope there, and I really resonate with that. Thank you, Wahyu, Sinhao, and Glenda, for sharing your insights with us today. Thank you to all the newsrooms present in the call, and of course to our listeners. If you like the conversation and want more episodes from the Good as News podcast, please hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this with others. Our next episode will dive more deeply into AI and its dangers, but also how journalism can make use of it in ways that don't diminish this deeply human craft. See you next time. Again, I'm Ranada. Goodbye.